All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my name is Reid. I'm a product manager here at Enable Technologies. And today's webinar, I'm going to be talking to you about what is new in N-central 9.1. What I'm going to be going over today is the new mobile device management module that's in N-central 9.1. I'll be going over the updates to our PSA integration, our integration with Autotask and with ConnectWise specifically. I'll talk about what's new in Automation Manager 1.5. It's a significant new version of Automation Manager that's new as of 9.1, and I want to make sure you guys understand what the value is that it provides. I'll also spend some time talking about the other changes that are present in N-central 9.1. There's some other smaller changes. There are some changes that are part of our 50-50 program. So let's start off by talking about mobile device management. What I want to do first is make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of the different terminology that exists in the mobile device management space. It's a fairly new industry. It's only a few years old, and there are different terms that people use. Marketing companies use, different online websites, different vendors that exist in this space. Everyone uses these terms a little bit differently, and so I want to make sure that when I talk about the features that are in N-central, that we're all just talking about the same thing. The reality is, mobile device management is really composed of three different areas. It's composed of device management, application management, and security management. Device management is really kind of the core functionality. More specifically, I'd like to define it as being the core functionality that's necessary to handle help desk tickets related to mobile devices. So this is the basics. You know what? It's being able to register a phone or a tablet within Central. It's being able to set up access to corporate Wi-Fi or corporate email accounts. It's tracking the device's location or wiping it or resetting its passcode. It's the basic tools and functionality that you need to handle those incoming calls about mobile devices. Mobile application management deals with the applications that are running on that phone or that tablet and with the user's capability to modify, install, or remove those applications. Some examples of this are being able to push out a specific app to all the phones that are under management by N-central, or updating an app because a new version has come out, or removing an app because you no longer want to have it installed. Another great example is from a user's point of view. Maybe you want certain users to be able to remove apps. Maybe you want certain users to be able to not remove any apps and not be able to install anything. So there's a lot of subtleties around mobile application management. It's a very neat aspect of taking care of mobile devices. Mobile security management, which is one of the areas that N-central really excels at, deals with applying a standardized set of security policies across multiple devices. Really what this means to you as an MSP responsible for taking care of your customers' mobile devices is that you need to be able to be confident that when those mobile devices go to access your customers' corporate resources, their documentation, their network, their file server, and so on, that those devices meet a certain minimum set of security requirements. They have, for example, a passcode enabled and turned on, and that passcode meets certain character restrictions, like it has to have a certain number of special characters. It may come down to locking down the capabilities that a user has on the phone. Maybe because that user is going to be entering a security conscious area, you don't want them to have access to the camera on the phone. It could also have to do with preventing unwanted charges. Perhaps what you want to do is prevent your user from purchasing items through the mobile device, either through in-app purchases or through iTunes, for example, or through the Google Play Store. Maybe what you want to do is make sure that nobody can erroneously or maliciously purchase apps on that particular tablet or that phone. Two other terms to discuss really quickly. In a lot of cases, what you'll see when companies talk about wiping mobile devices is they talk about enterprise wipe and they talk about full wipe. An enterprise wipe refers to really removing only the corporate data from a phone. The use case there is that if you have a customer, that customer has an employee, that employee has their own phone, but they're using that phone, their own personal phone, to access corporate data. Well, if your customer fires that employee, obviously he cannot wipe the person's phone. That's not acceptable because it's his own personal phone. But your customer wants to make sure that that employee or that ex-employee can no longer access his corporate email and that he hasn't downloaded emails and kept them on his phone. So an enterprise wipe is the idea, the workflow of just removing the ability for that device to access that, let's say, corporate email account and removing any content that user downloaded from that corporate email account. A full wipe, on the other hand, refers to resetting the device back to its factory defaults. So that includes removing any apps, getting rid of your contact history, your messaging history, your browsing history, as well as your corporate data. It reverts the phone back to its factory defaults fully. The phone doesn't know what Wi-Fi network to talk to, doesn't know what VPN connections to talk to, doesn't know what Exchange server to talk to. All of those settings get wiped out. That's a very useful action to have handy in case a phone has been lost. If your customer calls you and says that they've lost their phone because it's at an airport and they've now flown out of the airport, well, you might want to do a full wipe at that point and just blow it away because that phone is forever gone. Now that I've taken just a few minutes to explain some of the different terminologies that exist in the mobile device space, let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like in N-central. The first thing is you need to know how to invite devices into N-central. For mobile devices, what you can do is create what's called an invitation job. And the purpose of an invitation job is to send out an SMS message or an email to your customers and invite their mobile devices into N-central. The way that you do this is by going to the configuration menu and then mobile devices and clicking on invitations. In here you can create as many invitation jobs as you want. Think of them as discovery jobs like you have right now within N-central to discover normal network devices. When you create a new invitation job, you're going to get prompted if you haven't already entered this key. They can send out an email to these users or they can send out an SMS message. If you don't want to use SMS messaging, no problem. You can just ignore this warning message. But if you do, there's a company we've partnered with called Seedine that provides N-central with the capability of sending out those SMS messages through one of their publicly accessible APIs. It costs about a penny a text to send it out. But you can just enter the license key in N-central, and that will give N-central the capability to send out these invitations through SMS messaging. Very useful for if the phone or the tablet that you're trying to get into N-central doesn't yet have email set up. So when you create an invitation job, you've got to specify a name, give it a description, and then you need to tell it who to invite. And the way that you do that is by adding an email address, for example, and specifying how many devices you think the user at that email address actually has. For example, I know that I have an iPad and an Android phone and an iPhone. So I'm going to say that I expect 3 devices to be registered by this email address. And I can keep adding as many of these invites as I want. I can email my manager, I can email whoever else I need to. And each time that I do so, I can say, you know what, I expect that my manager, Rob, for example, I know he's got maybe 4 or 5 different devices. So as you can see, it's really easy to add different users to an invitation job. If you have the Seedine license key in N-central, one of the options that you'll get when you add a new invitation is instead of just having email here, it'll actually give you the option of choosing email or SMS, in which case you can enter a phone number for that user. Now what I've shown you so far is really handy if you're only inviting 1 or 2 people at a time. But what about if you want to invite an entire company? What I would suggest you do then is export that information from your PSA solution. If your PSA solution includes your customers' names, their phone numbers, their email addresses, export that from your PSA solution and import it into N-central by clicking on the Add from CSV option. This will let you choose how you want that CSV to be formatted, and you can then import them in bulk. Super handy way of getting a large number of contacts and people into N-central into that invitation job. So once you've configured the invitation job to have however many email addresses and phone numbers and device expectations set, you can then configure the advanced settings. Do you want to automatically import those mobile devices? I think you do. How long should these mobile device invitations be accessible for? You want to have them expire after a certain period of time because you don't want them to be available for forever. So by default, they're live for 7 days. Finally, you can choose whether or not you want to get notified when certain things happen related to the invitation job. Do you want to get notified when a device gets registered? Yes, I think you would. Do you want to get notified when the invitation job expires? Yes, likely you would. So once you've configured your invitation job, that sends out that SMS message, that sends out that email. The user needs to click on the link inside the email. They need to accept the management of that mobile device. Managing a mobile device is different than managing, let's say, a router or a switch, where you can passively sort of scan it using a protocol like SNMP and bring it into N-central. With mobile devices, a user, somebody, has to be on that phone or that tablet and actually accept and agree to have that phone or that tablet managed by N-central. It's a little bit of a different paradigm than what it is with network devices. So once your users have accepted that, they've accepted the management profile, what happens then? Well, if we go to the All Devices view, I'll show you. So what you'll notice coming from 9.0 into 9.1 is that we've divided the all devices view into two different tabs. There's now a network devices tab where your existing routers and switches and printers and workstations and servers get displayed. And there's also a new mobile devices tab, which is where your tablets and your phones will get displayed. We broke out the all devices view this way because you care about totally different data and totally different actions when it comes to network devices versus mobile devices. For network devices, you care about things like the network address and the last logged in user, and if they have N-Central's backup or patch management or endpoint security enabled. And in terms of actions, you care about things like adding monitoring services or configuring downtime or running a scheduled task. With mobile devices, though, you care about a completely different set of data and a completely different set of actions. You care about the phone number. You care about whether data roaming is enabled or not, or voice roaming is enabled. You care about whether GPS tracking is turned on. From an actions point of view, it's a completely different set of actions. You care about things like resetting a passcode or sending a message, and so on. So it makes sense to divide network devices and mobile devices up because it makes it much easier for you and your technicians to accomplish the right goal on a screen that isn't cluttered. The same sort of design philosophy applies when you click on a mobile device. Looking at this mobile device, my phone in this case, the layout of this screen is entirely different than what it is for network devices because, again, you care about entirely different information about a mobile device than you do for a networking device. In this case, we can see the warranty expiry date. In this case, my phone, the warranty is expired. Enable is actually the only MDM vendor that monitors the warranty expiry date of Apple devices. This gives you guys a unique competitive advantage over all of your competition in your field. You can now monitor the warranty expiry date of iPads, iPhones. Very neat. In terms of the asset data that we display, well, again, this is customized for mobile devices. You care about the IMEI number, for example. You care about whether the device is jailbroken or not. You care about, from a cell phone carrier point of view, who that carrier is, whether data roaming is enabled or not, whether carrier roaming is enabled or not. You care about what applications are installed. So you can see here, I can see all the applications that are installed on my phone. If I want to search for one, I can do so really quickly just by typing something in, and you can see that as I type something in, it automatically updates the field. I can also choose to export this list of applications to CSV or to PDF, so that if I want to take that data out of N-Central and do something with it, I can really easily do so. Very handy option. At the top of the page here, I can change the name of the phone if I wish. I can specify who the owner is. I can say this is my phone. And I can specify for tracking purposes, for inventory management purposes, whether this is a business phone or a personal phone. On the Associations tab, I can see which rules this mobile phone is associated with. On the Notes tab, I can see notes that anybody has added to this phone as they've been perhaps troubleshooting issues or taking care of problems. So for example, if I add a note here, there it is there. You can see who wrote it. I can also search the notes as I go. Nice handy option. When it comes to mobile devices, you're going to find your customers are fairly sensitive about understanding who has done what. These are their personal phones. It contains personal private data, conversations that they've had with their friends, not necessarily just with their coworkers. And so you need to have a way of auditing who has performed what actions against these devices. And Central gives you that capability. Not only do we show you actions that users have specifically performed, we also show you actions that N-Central has performed automatically on your behalf by applying settings through rules. So you can see here exactly what actions have been taken, who took them, what time, whether they were successful or not. And if you wish, you can also choose to resend those options. So if I see this message and I want to send it again, I can just click here and do so. Really easy. On the Profiles tab, I can see which mobile device profiles have been applied to the device. I'll talk a little bit more about mobile device profiles in just a few minutes, but this is one area where you can go to see what settings you have applied to the device. On the Tracking tab, and this is something that is very, very cool, you can see where the device has been over a period of time. In this case, you can see it with my phone. I've been all throughout Ottawa. I've been in the West End where my house is. I've been to work. I've been downtown to visit some friends. I've even gone over into Quebec and gone skiing over the weekend. So I can very clearly see where my phone has been. I can track its location. What I want to point out to you here is if you take a look at the readings on the right-hand side, you can see where it's been and how frequently it's updated, but you can also see an accuracy reading. It's important to understand that a phone may not always be able to get a very accurate reading. It's not like having a Garmin GPS, where it constantly has a very accurate, very strong signal to that GPS satellite system. With a phone, it'll try using GPS if it can, and if it can, you'll get a very accurate reading. If it cannot, it'll fall back to using cell phone tower triangulation or to connecting through a Wi-Fi network to try to figure out its location. Those are not as accurate technologies as GPS is. And so what you'll find is that depending on the location of the phone, and depending on what sort of access it has to the necessary technologies, the accuracy readings that you'll get will vary. The app that you install on Android phones or on Apple iOS devices will try to get as accurate a reading as possible off of the phone. If the phone reports back, for example, this reading, which has an accuracy of just over 1.4 kilometers, which isn't very great, the app will ask again, hey, can you give me a more accurate reading? And if the phone can, well then fantastic. If the phone cannot, well, the app will report back the most accurate reading that it can. So it's just an interesting difference between, for example, looking at your Garmin GPS versus what it is that a phone can provide to you. Accuracy matters. There's a radius here. It's somewhere in this radius. Now, going back to the all devices view, not only can I see information about the phone that I saw when I drilled down into the device, like if data roaming is enabled, if it's got GPS, or if it's lost, what the status of the action happens to be. I can also take action against the device here. And Central 9.1 is really designed to provide you as an MSP with all the tools and functions that you need to very quickly, very efficiently handle all the different types of cases that will come in related to mobile devices. If, for example, your customer calls you and says that they have lost their phone, it's lost at a bar or in an airport, you have several things that you can do. You can choose, for example, to immediately lock the device. Go ahead and lock it because you know what? Somebody may be accessing it. I want to lock that device right now. Boom. Screen's locked, taken care of. You can also choose, you know what? I want to understand where that device currently is. Well, that's easy. Click on Show Location and we'll show you the current location of that phone or that tablet. If, as I mentioned earlier, you think that the phone is lost for forever, you're never going to go back and get it, well, you can use the big hammer, the full wipe. And we give you a warning message here so that you understand what it is that you're doing. But we give you that capability here so you can choose, if you wish, to wipe that device back to its factory defaults and erase any sensitive data, be it personal or corporate. I'll talk more about Enterprise Wipe once I've reviewed mobile device management profiles, but this is the full wipe option here. Now, perhaps because the device has been lost, just for inventory management purposes, you want to mark it as such. So you can choose to select the device and you can say, you know what, this device is lost. That's just a tracking property here in N-Central. It doesn't do anything to the device, but when you go to report on your mobile devices, it lets you easily understand which devices may have been lost since you last ran that report. Another really handy feature is that you can send messages to these phones. That's useful for a couple of things. If you need to send, for example, a message to all of your customers to advertise that you've got to take down that router because, you know what, you've got to do it, it's an emergency, you have to take it down now, and they can't get their email anyway, well, you can send them a message over their phone through N-Central. Super handy. Or perhaps if you're actually doing something where you're working on a client's workstation and you had to send them away because they need to, you don't want them to see what you're doing necessarily, well, you can send them a message on their phone to tell them that they can come back when you're done. Very neat. Two little customizations, two last things to mention here on the All Devices view. And these apply both to the Network Devices tab and to the Mobile Devices tab. The first one is that you can export these devices to CSV or to PDF. So if I take a look at my Network Devices tab, I have a few devices here. If I wanted to export that to a PDF file, all I have to do is just click a button and it's done. And what that gives me is a nice table, in this case a PDF, that shows me all the information that I selected to see. The other really nice feature is that I can now choose which columns I want to see on either tab. Perhaps I don't want to see remote control. Perhaps I don't want to see device class. But then again, maybe I do. So I can add those back in. The same thing applies to the Mobile Devices tab. If I take a look here, I chose that I didn't want to see OS or OS version before. But you know what? Now I do. So I'll add those back in. Nice handy feature that lets you customize what it is that the All Devices view is showing you so that you can better go about troubleshooting and fixing problems without seeing any unnecessary data. So now things are looking pretty good. You know what? In terms of mobile device management, what I mentioned as being the basics, Well, you've got it. This is awesome so far. You've got devices invited, you're taking care of different things, but what about security management? What about taking care of things like Exchange settings or Wi-Fi settings? Well, that is where mobile device profiles come in handy. If you go to the configuration menu and go to mobile devices, there's an option called profiles here. And profiles for mobile devices are a little bit different than profiles for things like endpoint security or backup. With endpoint security or backup or patch, you apply one profile to a device, and that's all the settings that you apply to it. Here's your patch settings, and you're done. With mobile devices, if you think about it, a mobile device can connect to multiple different Wi-Fi networks, and it can connect to multiple different Exchange servers or Hotmail accounts or Gmail accounts. So with mobile devices, you can apply as many profiles as you want to a mobile device, and Central will aggregate them together and send that off in one shot to the device. But the reality is you're in the business now when it comes to mobile devices of applying many profiles simultaneously. If we take a look, you can see, you know what, here's an example that I set up for Enable's corporate mail. So this is how an iOS device or an Android device would talk to our corporate mail server. Here's the URL to connect to, here's the different options. You can configure a domain or an email address, set a password, how many days of mail to sync, and so on. Really handy stuff, very straightforward and simple to set up. What's really interesting is that if you take a look here on the right-hand side, there's a tab that you can pull out that shows you what options are supported on Android and what options are supported on iOS. In the case of iOS, pretty much everything's supported. Depending on what kind of profile it is, though, some of the options are not supported on Android. Android, unfortunately, is not quite as mature when it comes to being a managed mobile platform as iOS is. If we take a look at a different example, for example, at the passcode settings, which let you configure, is a passcode required? If it is required, how many characters does it have to have? How many days can it be before it has to be changed, and so on. It's a better blend. You can see a lot of the options are available for Android, and only a couple are not. So it's important to understand when you are creating these mobile device profiles, what options you're applying to different devices. You need to understand that iOS has a very, very rich set of APIs that we can hook into. Android doesn't quite as much. There are differences in functionality between Android and Apple. So once you've gone ahead and you've created your profiles, well, what now? Well, I mentioned earlier that one of the things that you would want to do is you'd want to be able to say any device that I'm managing through N-central has to have the right set of restrictions and passcode policies set up automatically. Now, if you're managing 4 mobile devices, that's no big deal. But if you're managing 1,000 mobile devices, you don't want to have to touch each one. So what we let you do now is you can actually apply mobile device management profiles through rules, much the same way that you do now with service templates and notifications and scheduled task profiles. In N-central 9.1, there's a new tab that's been added to rules called Mobile Device Configuration Options. And here, you can choose which profiles you want to add to any mobile devices that match this rule. So for example, if I want to apply that Exchange MDM profile, I can do so. I can also choose here, should I allow my users to remove these MDM profiles if they wish to do so? And I have 3 options. I can choose to always allow them to do so. I can choose to never allow them to do so. Or I can choose to only allow them to do so if they have the right password, that password being what I set here. So what you can do as an example here is create a passcode profile that sets the appropriate passcode restrictions. You can then push that out at the SO level, at the service organization level, across all your customers through a rule. And that way all of them instantaneously, automatically, have the right passcode settings set up. And as you go forward, you onboard new customers, those new customers get those settings as well. Then at the customer level, you can create rules that apply the customer-specific Wi-Fi profiles, the customer-specific Exchange or VPN profiles, but it's all done automatically. Alternately, if you wish, you can go to the All Devices view, go to the Mobile Devices tab, go into that phone, and when you go to the Profiles tab, you can choose to apply profiles here. So I can, for example, again, for my phone specifically, I want to go ahead and apply this Exchange profile, no problem, done. Now I mentioned earlier that N-central lets you do what's called an enterprise wipe. You can selectively wipe corporate data. The way that you do that is actually just by removing the profile from the device. If you go to the Profiles tab and remove and delete this profile, not only does it prevent the phone from accessing that Exchange server again, it also automatically deletes any of the emails that phone got from that Exchange account. So doing an enterprise wipe is just as simple as removing the mobile device profile that you had previously applied to give the device that capability in the first place. Very, very easy, very straightforward to do. When it comes to mobile devices, the last piece that I wish to talk to you about today is about reporting. If we go into the reports menu here, there are a few reports that I wanted to take note of in this webinar. The first is that from a licensing point of view, a mobile device does not consume an Essentials node, nor does it consume a professional node. It consumes its own node type. So because of that, the license usage report has been updated to not only include professional and Essentials nodes, it now also includes the consumption of your mobile devices. So you can see here how many MDM nodes this customer or this service organization or this Essential server is using. Because we gather the warranty expiry date for Apple mobile devices, the warranty expiry report has also been updated to include mobile devices. If I run the report, I can see here not only my Lenovo laptops for myself and my coworker Ryan, I can also see the warranty has expired for my iPhone. So this gives you a way of showing your customers what devices have expired warranties. Very, very handy, very powerful selling tool for you to use. The third report to mention, and this is a brand new report in Essential 9.1, is the mobile device status report. This is a report that's great for inventory purposes. When I run the report, I can see what devices I have under management. In this case, I just happen to have only my phone on this Essential server, but I can see here the breakdown of software versions, operating system versions, by manufacturer, and also by model. Down below, I can see information specific to each device, who the owner is, the manufacturer, the version of operating system that's running, and so on. This gives you a couple of really great use cases. What it lets you do, for example, is you can see that, you know what, all of your customers' phones are running HTCs, and they're running an older version of Android, and those phones are now need to be updated. Well, you can easily see that here in Essential in this report, understand which devices those are. You can even go ahead and choose to send them a message in Essential to say, hey, you should update your phone, there's a new version that's out. This report gives you a really good idea of what you're managing and what your customer's managing, and from there you can take decisions on that data, understanding what models you have, what manufacturers you need to support and be conversant with, and maybe what versions of phones or what people's phones need to be updated. So as you can see, mobile device management really is composed of a lot of different activities, and Essential gives you a fantastic head start on how to provide mobile device management to your customers. The one last use case to talk about just really quickly is the most painful use case that I think you're probably coming across right now without Essential 9.1 is when your customer calls you, they've got their mobile device, and they want to access their corporate email, or they want to access the corporate Wi-Fi. Right now, you've got to walk them through that process. You know, Mr. Customer, click here, input this data, click there, input this data. It's frustrating for your technician because it's boring and it's time-consuming. It's frustrating for your customer because he feels silly. He's being talked down to. He's got to enter this information he doesn't want to. He just wants to get access to his email and go. He doesn't want to have to spend time setting up the technology. Well, you can actually use profiles to totally reverse that situation around and make it a really positive experience for both your technician and for your customers. By simply going in Essential to the Mobile Devices tab and, for example, applying the right exchange profile, like so, your technician's done. He's now pushed the right settings down to the customer's phone. The customer just needs to enter his password, and it's taken care of. Your technician is happy because he can immediately move on to more profitable, more interesting activities, and your customer's really happy because you've just solved his problem in about 4 seconds. This is a really great reason for why you need Essential to provide mobile device management. Without this kind of functionality, you've got unhappy customers, and you've got techs that are spending time on activities that are not very profitable. With Essential, you've got happy customers, you've got technicians that are quickly solving problems, and therefore, you've got a profitable MDM program that you can offer to your clients. Now, let's go back to the slideshow for a second. I'd like to move on from mobile device management to our PSA integration. Now, mobile device management is brand new in 9.1. It's a version 1.0 of this release. We intend on updating it over the coming year with new features as they get requested. It's something that we think, while it's very, very useful right now in 9.1, we still think that there's more we can do to make it even more useful as time goes on. In contrast, Our integration with Autotask and with ConnectWise is something that we've had for quite a while. It's a fairly mature module, but it needed a significant amount of work to bring it up to your expectations. Partners have been really vocal about how they'd like to see our integration with Autotask and ConnectWise improved. They've mentioned a couple of different very common use cases where, at the moment with 9.0, we weren't doing what they expected. We were causing them headaches where they didn't want them. I'm happy to say that 9.1 is meant to address all of the issues that have been brought to our attention. It really is a fantastic leap forward for our PSA integration, and it makes it that mature, very, very flexible, very, very powerful module that you've been asking us for. In terms of what problems it solves, well, with previous versions of N-central, tickets could only be created under one service board or one queue. We've solved that by letting you create as many ticketing recipients as you want, and each ticketing recipient can send tickets to different boards or different queues. We've heard complaints and issues that N-central was creating duplicate tickets. When a service would go failed and then normal and failed and then normal, it would create a ticket each time as opposed to just reopening the existing ticket. So now we have, within ticketing recipients, really flexible logic that lets you control when and how N-central should either reopen an existing ticket, update an existing ticket, or perhaps create a new one if that's what you wish. Another issue that we came across was that N-central would log a ticket in your ticketing system. The technician would actually go ahead and fix whatever the problem happened to be, and so N-central would detect that the service had gone back to a normal state, at which time it would immediately close the ticket. Well, that was before the technician had a chance to enter his final comments and add his time entries, which is a pain. So now, ticketing recipients can be configured to only close a ticket when certain specific criteria and certain circumstances are met. Another important update was you, as an N-central customer, or Enable customer I should say, are relying quite heavily on N-central to perform automated tasks for you, like self-healing, or monthly maintenance routines, or doing defrags. Those are activities that you used to perform manually, and so your clients would see you on location. Well, now that N-central is performing those activities on your behalf, your customer doesn't see what you're doing for them. So what we've let you do is you can now have N-central create a ticket in your ticketing solution when it runs a self-healing task or when it runs a scheduled task, and have that ticket have a time entry associated to it, so that at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, you can show your customers, here's all the activities that I performed, here's all the hours I've spent fixing your network. Regardless of whether it's you manually doing it or N-central doing it on your behalf, it's still work that you've done, and now you've got tickets to show your customers what you're doing for them every month, every week, every quarter, that sort of thing. So let's go take a look. Let's go back into N-central and take a look at what ticketing recipients look like and how you can set them up. The PSA integration menu has moved from the configuration menu down into the administration menu. When you open it up, you've got to specify a few things. You've got to specify, for example, the credentials to use to talk to, in this case, Autotask. This is an Autotask username and password. You must also specify an email address where N-central will send a message if we cannot update or create or close tickets in ConnectWise or in Autotask. The reason for this, the use case, is if N-central is able to talk successfully to your PSA solution, but then there's a networking issue and suddenly it cannot, well, in previous versions of N-central, you wouldn't know what tickets got updated, what we were trying to do. With this, now the person whose email address is listed here will get an email whenever we can't do what you've told us to do with your ticketing system. At least that way you have traceability and understand what it is that we're trying to do, what state tickets are currently in, should a networking issue or a communications problem happen. Once you've configured this screen, you're then able to configure the ticketing recipients. And you can see I have two examples here. Let's take a look at the critical servers example. Every time you go into a ticketing recipient, it's going to refresh its data that it has with Autotask or with ConnectWise. This is to ensure that you can always choose from the most recent data, and that if there are any fields that have been changed, you're able to fix it right away. So on the Ticketing Details tab, I can control what properties get assigned to a ticket when they get created through this ticketing recipient. What queue do I want it to go in? What source and status? What issue and sub-issue type? What contact and contract to use for this ticketing? This is very similar to what you had in N-central 9.0. There's a few new fields, but it's generally the same rough idea. Where things get interesting is on the Notification Settings tab. This is where that logic exists that I was mentioning earlier. Let's walk through it. So I can choose, for example, when an issue is resolved, when it goes back to a normal state, what do I want to do? Do I want to just add a note to the ticket but not change the status? Maybe. Do I actually want to change the status of the ticket? Maybe I do. Maybe now that the issue is solved, I want to mark it as complete. But you know what? I only want to do that if it's in one of these states. This lets you choose, you know what, update this status to complete, that's fine, but only if it's in one of the 3 states that you see here. If it's in progress, for example, don't update the status. That solves that use case that I mentioned earlier, where Incentral was closing the ticket before the technician had time to enter his final comments and his time entries. Down below is how we let you handle repeat failures. When a service is going back and forth between normal and failed, well, the first time that it does that, we start a time window. We open a window of time where if the service does that same thing again, if it generates a notification in that time window, we will not open up a new ticket. Instead, we will either add a note to the existing ticket or we'll reopen the ticket if it's been closed. Very handy way. You guys can set this up to be whatever number value you want. It's measured in hours. Very handy way to ensure that duplicate tickets don't get created unless you want them to. Another option that you have is if the ticket gets reopened, what do you want the status to be? So you can choose here which status you wish. Down below, you can configure how Incentral should determine if a given Windows event log entry is actually a duplicate of an existing ticket or not. A lot of times you want to match on the ID and the source. That makes sense. A lot of times you want to match in the description because it's the exact same description no matter what. But sometimes, you know what? The description field changes. Sometimes it has a date in it. And so it's never going to be the same thing. The description field is going to be different every time that event occurs because that date keeps changing, that timestamp keeps changing, in which case you don't want to match on the description field. You only want to match on the ID and the source. That'll prevent duplicate notifications from occurring. So you can see here, this is a really, really flexible, really powerful way to configure how it is that Incentral handles tickets. When should it create duplicates? What actions should it take? This is a huge step forward in terms of what we had in 9.0. If I take a look at the self-healing ticketing recipient, in this case, I'm not so much concerned about the first 2 tabs, the ticket details tab and the notification settings tab. I'm concerned about the time entry tab. So here I can configure, and again this is for Autotask, but it's very similar for ConnectWise. I can configure, you know, who the contract is, if it's billable or not, should it be shown on the invoice, how many hours worked, how I want to offset those hours, and so on. Now, whenever I create a scheduled task or a self-healing task, all I need to do is just add this ticketing recipient as a notification recipient for that activity. So for example, if I choose to run a script, I can go ahead and configure that script to do whatever it is that it needs to do, run a defrag or that sort of thing. And down below, all I need to do now is just choose that ticketing recipient, and I'm off to the races. So ticketing recipients really make it very, very flexible for you to configure how and when and under what circumstances Incentral creates tickets, creates time entries, and updates tickets. This is a huge step forward. This makes Incentral a very, very flexible, very, very powerful tool that integrates very, very well with Autotask or with ConnectWise. There's one other update to talk about related to ConnectWise. Previous versions of Incentral, they exposed data to ConnectWise through an API. So ConnectWise would talk to our API and pull back servers and workstations. The limitation on their side was that they only pulled back servers and workstations. And they happened to use a version of our API that was old enough that it didn't really have very much data to pull. We decided to take care of those 2 issues as part of this PSA update in 9.1. What we did was instead of ConnectWise pulling from our APIs, we now push to their APIs. We push to their managed device API. What this means for you is now all devices will go into ConnectWise, not just servers and workstations, but routers and printers and firewalls, mobile devices. They'll all end up as configuration items in ConnectWise. And the amount of data that you get for those devices, the asset data that comes along with them, is much, much broader than what it used to be in previous versions of Incentral. For example, you can now get serial numbers and warranty expiry dates, information that you just didn't have access to before with the previous Incentral and ConnectWise integration. This is a big step forward as well. So we've talked about the 2 big changes, our new mobile device management module and our integration with Autotask and with ConnectWise. There are several other significant changes, though, to discuss. One is, on the agent front, we've made a number of serious changes. The agent now supports Windows 8 and Windows Server 2012. It also requires .NET Framework 4.0. What this means really is that because .NET 4 cannot be installed on Windows 2000, it's not supported, the 9.1 Windows agent can no longer be run on Windows 2000 devices. What you can do, however, is you can install the old 9.0 agent on a Windows 2000 device, and Essential 9.1 is smart enough that it won't tell that agent to upgrade. So you can continue to manage Windows 2000 devices using a 9.0 agent, but you just can't take advantage of the new features that are present in the 9.1 agent until you upgrade the operating system to something newer than Windows 2000. The Mac agent has been updated to support OS X 10.8. The Linux agent has been significantly updated. It now runs on 64-bit versions of Linux. It also supports Red Hat and CentOS 6.x and 5.x. The installer has also been cleaned up quite a lot. Previous versions of the Linux agent used to halt if dependencies were not met. If OpenSSL, for example, wasn't found on the device, the installer wouldn't continue on and try to install it. It would actually halt at that point. That's now been changed. If there are prerequisites that the agent needs, it'll install them on your behalf as part of the installer. This should result in a much smoother experience for you in terms of getting the Linux agent installed on brand new, unpatched Linux servers. The other important change is that Automation Manager has been significantly updated now in 9.1. Now we have Automation Manager 1.5. The focus on this version of Automation Manager was really expanding out the catalog of objects that you have within AM so that you can create much more flexible, much more powerful scripts. There's brand new objects for Active Directory domains and trusts, directory sites and services, file management, computer management. There's now over 300 objects within Automation Manager. This is a huge, huge step forward over Automation Manager 1.4. There is so much more that you can do now because of the different objects that have been added. It's definitely worth taking a fresh look at Automation Manager, taking a look at all the new objects and understanding just what you can do with them. To kickstart that, there's actually a number of new Automation Manager policies on the Enable Resource Center now that are available for you for download as of today that leverage the new Automation Manager 1.5 objects. There's 14 new scripts in total. Definitely go take a look at them. They're very, very powerful, and they're great examples to give you an idea of what it is that you can do with those new objects. In terms of other changes, there are a ton of other smaller changes that have come within Central 9.1. Let's go ahead and look through the UI. One of the changes is that the branding options have now been moved from the Central Admin Console into the UI. What this means for you is at the system level, underneath administration, there's a new branding option. This branding option lets you control all the different brandable aspects of Incentral through simple text fields and simple color pickers. The problem that we heard before was that modifying branding was too complicated. You had to modify CSS or JSP files, you had to know how to do web programming a little bit, and if you did something very, very customized that from one version of Incentral to the next, because it was so customized, we didn't necessarily know how to handle it from the upgrade point of view. Sometimes those changes would get overwritten. What you'll find now is that branding is much easier to do, and then going forward, the branding that you select will be kept because it's all controlled through the Incentral UI. As an example, if what I want to do is change the color of the Incentral menus, for example, well, all I need to do is customize it here. I can choose from an existing color in the drop-down. I can go to the Advanced tab and enter my RGB colors or my hex codes. It's really easy to do, and then I just need to save it, and I'm done. I can also choose, for example, on the sign-in page, all the different text that I can customize here. I can figure out what it is that I want. I can customize things as I so need. I can make it so that it looks more like my corporate website as opposed to the stock enabled branding. That remote desktop support option on the login page, I can choose whether or not I want to show it. And if I do want to show it, I can choose to customize all the text that gets displayed. Maybe I want to have helpful text that's specific to my customers in here. Well, that's easy to do. So branding is entirely redone, entirely redesigned. It's going to be much, much easier to use going forward. What you can expect as a user going from 9.0 to 9.1 is that all of your branding images will be ported over. So the branding images that you use here, they'll all get moved into 9.1. But that many of the changes, if you've gone to the extent of customizing your CSS and JSP files, many of those changes are not ones that we can migrate easily into this new mechanism. And so what you may find is that on upgrade to 9.1, some of the funky, weird customizations that you've made may get overwritten, and you may need to redo them using this new methodology. Another change that's been made is with Direct Connect. There was a lot of feedback. This is a very popular remote control technology. What some people wanted, though, was they wanted the ability that when they launched Direct Connect, they wanted the user to have the option to grant permission to the technician to actually access that computer. So now with Direct Connect, I have a new option called Request User Permission, where I can choose what text the user sees, I can choose how long the request is displayed for, and then I can choose what to do when that request times out. If the user doesn't acknowledge it, yes or no, do I want to continue allowing the technician to remotely control the device or not? This can be set on a per device basis. You can just set it here. You can also go to the defaults menu, though, and go to remote control defaults and pick your device class and set it here. So you can say, you know what, for all my laptops or for all my workstations, I do or do not want to request user permission. Very, very handy feature to use if that's something that your customers want. Another change that's been made is inside of service templates. And they both relate to reducing the number of tasks that you need to perform when you're onboarding a new client in N-central. If I take a look at a service template, and specifically, if I pick on the Exchange 2003 service template, you can see that this service template applies a number of different monitoring services. It applies the HTTP service, the POP service, and the SMTP service. Well, in previous versions of N-central, when we found an Exchange 2003 server, we would apply this service template. It would apply the POP service and the SMTP service. But what if your Exchange server is only running one of those protocols, which is what happens a lot of the time? Well, one of the two services would go failed. You'd have to figure out why, you'd have to troubleshoot the problem, and then likely remove the monitoring service because it's not necessary. If you're using POP, chances are you're not using SMTP, and vice versa. The change that we've made in N-central 9.1 is now, with any of the TCP-based services, you can choose to use asset info. What this means is that if we find that that port is open on the device, we will add this service. But if we find that the port's not open, we won't add the service. This will reduce the number of sort of false positives or false notifications that you need to clean up as you're onboarding your customers. The other change relates to the Windows service. If I take a look, for example, at this service template here, it's got a Windows service monitor. And you can see it's monitoring a Windows service called Acronis Scheduler 2 service. Well, that's fine for this version of Acronis. But what about if in the next version, it's not called Scheduler 2, it's called Scheduler 3? What we've done with this is unique to the Windows service, you can now use wildcards. So for example, you can now say, you know what, I want to monitor any Windows service that contains the word Acronis. And so long as that service does that, we'll automatically start monitoring it. If you've got 10 services that contain the word Acronis, this service template will apply 10 unique monitors, one for each service to be monitored. Really handy thing to do. The other change is that by default now, we will only monitor Windows services if their startup type is set to automatic. This will reduce, again, false negatives, false notifications, because the service is set to disabled or is set to manual and isn't currently running. Now, that may be something that you want to turn off, just depending on how your customers are doing things, what applications that you're monitoring. That's easy to do. All you need to do is go, again, to Administration and Defaults, and go to Service Templates. And there's an option here, Monitor Windows Services only when the startup type is automatic. It's turned on by default. You can turn it on or off at the system, the SO, and the customer level, and you can propagate that down. So it's a new feature. It's something that should make your onboarding much more clean and much easier to do. But it is something that you can turn off if you wish. The last few things that I want to mention, there's a couple related to VMware. One is that now with the guest status service, you can add that service to vCenter servers. Previously, the service was only available on ESXi hosts. We made it available on vCenter servers so that you can monitor the guests through the vCenter server regardless of what host the guest actually resides on. This will prevent the guest status service from going misconfigured when it changes from one host to the next. The other change that we've made, and this is based off of feedback from many of you, is that when you're entering your VMware password into N-central to perform a VMware discovery, we've relaxed the restrictions around the special characters that you can enter. What this lets you do is you no longer need to modify your VMware Server's root password to match what N-central has for restrictions, now you can make sure that whatever your root password is, or whatever the password is that you want to give N-central for your vCenter server or your ESXi server, we will accept it without giving you any sort of prompts about forbidden special characters. This should make your onboarding, again, a little bit easier to do. The final change, and this is more of a deprecation as opposed to a new feature, N-central 9.1 is the last version of N-central that will officially support Internet Explorer 8. So starting with N-central 9.2, which is going to come out in the second quarter of this year, we'll only support IE 9 and forward. Now, again, in the interest of time, I want to make sure that I have time to answer all the questions that have come up. I'm going to go ahead and stop demoing stuff and start answering questions. What I would recommend, though, is you can download 9.1 today. If you're an on-premise customer who is up to date on their M&S payments, you can download it right now from the NRC. Go get it. It is a phenomenal release of N-central. It gives you exciting new revenue opportunities. It gives you lots of new functionality. It is a great, great release of N-central. There are a few other smaller tweaks and such that I've gone past in this webinar just in the interest of time. If you want to learn more, please feel free to go to the Help menu and click on What's New. There's an exhaustive list of all the new features that are here. Makes it very, very easy to understand what's new and what you'd like to see. With that, let's take a look at some questions. First question, is there an extra fee to use the MDM module? Not for the module itself. You will need to pay per mobile device. A mobile device will consume a new license. It won't be Essentials, won't be Professional. So mobile devices will incur a cost to you per device. Another good question. Are there any plans to develop an agent for BlackBerry? Super popular platform. Definitely as we go forward past 9.1, we definitely want to take a look at BlackBerry support, Windows 8 mobile support. Those are two very highly requested features. If you take a look at the mobile space right now, Android and Apple together have over 85% of the market, so certainly adding support for those two vendors in the first release of MDM was critical. But yes, going forward we want to make sure we broaden our support to include as many platforms as our customers demand of us. Another good question, is there virus protection for mobile within this right now? The short answer is no, there's not at this point right yet. There's no antivirus product built in for mobile devices in N-central 9.1. Going forward though, we want to continue exploring and exploiting our good relationship with Bitdefender though. We want to look at maybe incorporating their technology into N-central to give you guys the opportunity to provide mobile antivirus for your Android devices to your customers. Another good question, does 9.1 support Windows Server 2012 core installations? Yes, it absolutely does. Pretty much every version of Windows Server 2012 has been tested and supported. If you find that there's something weird with core, please let us know, but it has been tested in-house. It should work just fine. Another question, regarding MDM, will there be the ability to create a profile to set up Exchange on an Android device? Excellent, excellent question. Right now, N-central 9.1 can set up Exchange profiles for iOS devices, for Apple devices, but it cannot do that for Exchange, or for Android devices. The reason for that is that natively, Android doesn't have any APIs that we can use to set up those options. What we're going to look into post 9.1 is there's a third-party app called Touchdown that if you have it installed on an Android device, it looks to be able to provide you with that kind of capability. So going forward after 9.1, we definitely want to try to, as much as we can to bring feature parity between Android and iOS and N-central. I don't really want to keep having a difference between what you can do with Android and what you can do with Apple devices, but we are constrained by what the vendor lets us do. As Google matures their platform though, we'll definitely take advantage of any new APIs that they add in. Another question, is 9.8 / third-party application updates going to be integrated into N-central? Not in 9.1, it's actually coming in 9.2. Great question. So today we're just releasing 9.1, fantastic. Next week we're going into beta for 9.2. We barely have time to breathe, and we're going to be doing 9.2. 9.2 is very much focused on patch, third-party patch for Essentials. If that's something you're interested in, please feel free to sign up on the NRC. The sign-up form for 9.2 should be available in the next few days. Another question. Do we support a SIGRA 11.2 and 12.0? The answer is yes. Because we've moved the agents now to use .NET 4, we can now properly query the APIs that Asigra provides in their later versions of their product. So N-central 9.1, and more specifically the N-central 9.1 agent, can successfully now monitor Asigra 11.2 and 12.0. Another question. With the update of the agent, is endpoint security now supported in Windows 8? Right now, support for Windows 8 in terms of endpoint security is something that's handled separately from N-central. It's not supported in Panda at this point, which is the currently integrated endpoint security product in N-central. It's something that we're working on with Bitdefender, and when we integrate Bitdefender into N-central this year, well, that support will come at that time. Last questions. Are there enhanced privacy features for BYOD, since some people have personal phones and may not want that level of intrusion? It's a really interesting conversation to have with your customers in terms of understanding what it is that they want you to perform for them and what they're comfortable with doing and how they understand what sort of access you have to their phone. I think what's going to start happening is, depending on who your customers are, depending on if it's BYOD versus something where you are providing them with the phones yourself, it's really a conversation around here are the clear, very concise rules of what it is that I'm going to do as an MSP, and here's what it is that you can expect because of that as a customer. Here's the things that I'm going to do, here's the things that I will not do, here's the things that are explicitly allowed, and here's the things that are contractually forbidden when you enter with agreement to manage their mobile devices. Okay, I want to be sensitive to time still. I'll answer just a few last questions. If you guys have a couple of more, feel free to ask them, but just because we're running short, I don't want to take up too much of people's time. Last question, Wake on LAN support. That's an excellent, excellent request, one that we get quite a lot. It is not in 9.1. However, it's coming in Automation Manager 1.6, which is going to be out later on this year, in the summer. So definitely not part of 9.1. We are actively working on that right now. It's coming. Last question. Are there any new features for Mac OS X in 9.1? No is the short answer. But the longer answer, which is much cooler, is yes, we are working on new Mac features. Even as we speak, in the next couple days, we're going to be starting to work on a few new things. You can definitely expect this year to see some significant enhancements to the Mac agent in terms of functionality, in terms of monitoring, in terms of management capabilities and scripting, remote control, and also asset data. So at this point, I want to thank you very much for attending this webinar. I think 9.1 is a fantastic release. I'm very, very excited to get it out into the field. I think you guys are going to find it really offers you new revenue opportunities with MDM. It offers you a lot of brand new functionality with our PSA integration, and it offers a lot of new features and functionality that were requested by you as part of our 50 and 50 program. Thank you very, very much for your time. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to contact your sales engineer, our sales team, or myself. We're always happy to communicate and talk with you guys. Thank you very much and have a great day.